No, I never did like the Greeks anyway. Never. And when they came in that bronze boat, up through the sea that ships seldom came, to our wide lands, they exuded all that nonchalance, all that superiority as they looked at our lands of peace and our lands of plenty, where we look after and nurture all, swaggering in as if all their violence and all their poverty was itself a virtue. I'd seen them before. Perhaps I alone of our people remember of the old wars, how we beat the Greeks back and set up ourselves as Amazons in this wide land, given to us by Ares, to them a beast, to us a king. And he is the only man allowed here. And all boy children we give to the barbarians of the north, and they become wiser through them. And we take the girls they do not want. And so we rule this wide land. Before my lady Hippolyta and her sister, their mothers and their grandmothers, I was born in the days of Hippolyta's grandmother, and have long served the queen of this land as her shield woman. And I remember when that boat came, and I told my lady just to close the doors of all the cities. Do not listen to the counsels of the Greeks. Do not accept the gifts that they give, for they bring the war with them. The war that we have taken from our land, as our master Ares showed us how to do. But when they landed, she was curious, and she went down with her army and me by her side, fully armed, as the Greeks in a long boat landed, 40 great warriors. And I looked at them and I thought they were bad news, particularly that dark-haired one, who they called the Duke, who appeared to have paid for the trip, from the way he swaggered. A newly minted hero, men said, he who had killed the poor Minotaur, and so killed his father. But before them strode the hero. Hercules they called him, Heracles we called him, in memory, if not of his mother, of his foster mother, she who gave him milk. And Heracles took then from his belt a sword. Now this detail I know, for I have heard them. The Greeks have chosen to forget in all this sorry tale that this sword was a gift for our queen, or an exchange. For Heracles had come for something the queen of the Amazon will wear. That belt that had been given to them by Ares himself, that rendered the wearer immaculate, perfect, chaste, invulnerable to arrows, whether they be from Athene or Eros. And the wild tyrant of Tyrrhens had desired that belt. But Hercules, knowing our power and our honour, had not come empty-handed. For we heard that he had prayed up in the very Pantheon of Athens, the very house of the goddess herself. And Athena had come down to him and offered him in exchange, as one god of war to another, as a peace offering to our giving it to our god, her old enemy Ares, a sword. That sword she had Vulcan himself forge from the shards of that dagger that in former times Kronos had used to castrate his father. A blade then, beyond power and majesty and might. A blade of lineage that once drawn could never be sheathed. And that blade that the queens now wear is not bronze as all blades are, all other blades, but made of black iron that fell from thunderbolts from the sky. For that metal is the delight of Athena. This sword then Hercules offered in exchange for the girdle of Ares. Sword for girdle, gift of Athena for gift for Ares, that both kingdoms, Greeks and Amazons, might be enriched. And I whispered to my queen, do not trust these Greeks. He might be all right, but the others. I looked, and the dark-haired duke looked with full, greedy eyes at Hippolyta. But she, in her chaste innocence, did not notice, poor love. She did not know their ways. And she smiled and said, I am not ready yet to exchange, but I would know who you were. Come to a feast tonight without weapons, and we will not carry our own. And then we rode back to our palace, and we decorated with such beauty, with flowers and weapons and glorious and tapestries, and roasted then pig and sheep and cow. And the Greeks swaggered in, expecting to be served by us ladies, but we made them serve themselves. And we sat and chatted with them, telling them tales of our deeds, our great wars in the east and the north, how all men quaked and feared us. And they told us tall tales of their gods, and the wars they'd hardly won in the great lands of the south. And Hercules talked long with Hippolyta, and she wore the belt to guard her chastity, and he carried the sword. But otherwise, love might have arose. But both the children of gods closed it down. But I looked then at the dark duke, who they called Theseus, who looked at Hippolyta with eyes of lust whenever she looked away from Hercules. Owl's eyes that would devour her soul. Well, my queen was impressed, and I accept. Of all Greeks, he is the one I remember fondly, and can really believe that he is the son of God, Zeus incarnate. And that is saying a lot. The next day, they agreed that we would pile our weapons high, and they would pile their weapons high, and the two armies would face off one to the other. And then I and my queen, and Heracles and Theseus would stand out and make the exchange. And so we stood, the armies perhaps 2 bow shots from each other, and us in the middle. And Heracles took off the sword, and Hippolyta held it up. And then Hercules, he took a bronze shield from Theseus, and he bade the queen split the shield with the sword, and it rendered it quite in two. As if it were a thunderbolt it fell. And the queen smiled and said, "It is a worthy exchange, god of war to god of war." And carefully she took off the belt that guarded her against the blows of war and love. And she gave it to Theseus. And Theseus, taking it, gave it to Hercules. Now Hercules had the arrogance of men. He was going to put that belt on himself, just for a while. And he struggled and struggled and struggled with the belt, for it had such a clasp that if you did not know its secret, you would have to be more than the Son of God to find it. Now while he struggled, Theseus made his play at Hippolyta. At first he grabbed her, saying, "Now you are not chaste. Surely you see my power." And he pushed back his oiled hair and strutted as if he was some slave boy in some far market. And Hippolyta pushed him away. And Theseus, who did not like this, pushed her back. Now Hippolyta had spirit, so she hit him full in the face, and he fell down. And Hercules was as one enchanted, still struggling with the belt. And all the Greeks hooted Theseus. Now Theseus was furious, and he drew a secret dagger. And with that secret dagger, he went to Hippolyta, and as she struck him, he brought the dagger up under her ribs, hitting her heart. And she fell back. And then he called to Hercules, "Look, treachery!" And Hercules, looking up, saw not the dagger from his angle, only the fact that Hippolyta had been in the act when she was stabbing of hitting Theseus, who already had one black eye. And he said, "What? Treachery? She attacks?" And Hippolyta fell to the ground, and Duke Theseus called to his men, "Arms, Greeks, arms!" Came charging up the hill. But Hercules had laid the belt aside, said, "Keep this from me now, and hide with your queen. For my heart tells me that I do not know the full truth of what has happened here." And then he let the Greeks surge past him, while our warriors had grabbed their weapons and were coming fast. And the battle raged fast and furious over me. From where I was, I could see that Hercules did not lead the charge. That was Theseus. He stood at the back, thoughtful, not meaning to let the Greeks be all slain, but not saving them either. Until that moment, when the sister of the queen had struck Theseus down and was going to kill him. And then Hercules stepped forth, rescuing his friend, pushing the sister of our queen away, strode off to the boats, and all the Greeks flocked after him, badly beaten, and some dead, and 5 of our greatest warriors too. We mourn them yet. And when Hercules had laid Theseus, the scoundrel, in the boat, he came back to me, and all our warriors were around me, seeing the dead queen. And he said, "At other times, I might have tried to find out who was to blame here, for I do not yet know. But I think we must go. I must take the Duke back to his kingdom. Will you honour the bargain? Can I take the belt and you keep the sword?" And I said, for it was up to me to ask, "I know the Queen's heart. She honoured her bargains in death and life. But one favour I ask you. May we swap the rubies that each god of war put upon their gift to men and women? Sword and girdle." And he said, "But why?" And I looked at him and I said, "That girdle makes the wearer inviolate, immaculate. They cannot be slain in battle as long as it is intact. And this sword can cut through anything as long as it is intact. But if we swap the jewels over, then their power is broken. Oh, that girdle is still beautiful. It will still help the wearer much, but it will not make them invincible. And this sword will be sorely compromised at the last." And Hercules said, "We owe fate that much." And with his thumb, he pulled off the solder that held the ruby of the belt, and then reaching for the sword, pulled off the pommel, the jewel upon the pommel, and swapping them over. With his licked thumb, he mended the solder, as if the heat of Zeus burned so bright in him that it actually melt metal. And then he smiled and said, "For my part, I am sorry." And I said, "And I am sure for our part we are sorry that full 20 of you were slain." And Hercules went home. And we built then a pyre and burned the Greeks in honour, and laid our 5 warriors hard on the ground. And the queen became, or the queen's sister became our new queen, and I've served her long. And she wears always the belt, and she always wears always on her belt the sword. And the sword still cuts bronze like butter. But it is said by our wisest, the greatest of our smiths, that the black metal with which it is forged is not so very rare, and that if you heat red clay hot, the black metal flows forth, and that one day with it, perhaps, Ares will lead us to revenge our murdered queen upon the far